Thanks Harry and thanks Jerry. It's great on the note that Nancy ended on there. It's actually good. Just looking around the room, I think I'm correct in saying we've got consumer representatives here from about 15 countries today, which shows that this report means something to a lot of people, and that's a very, very gratifying thing for the team that were behind the production of it. I'm going to move now to comments and questions. What I'd like to do, if I may, first is to invite any of our colleagues, I know there are a few of you in the audience, any of our colleagues from the media who'd like to ask any questions, because Jerry is only going to be able to be with us for another 20 or so minutes because he has another engagement. So are there any questions about the report from our media colleagues? No? We must be doing something right. Okay, general discussion, questions, comments, everything welcome. Jess has a microphone. Just put your hand up and, as I said, please identify who you are and any organisation you represent.
Hi, my name is Charles. I'm from the ANSVAP Association, Spanish Consumers of Vaporizers. And my question is simple but very hard. When there is enough evidence for the tobacco control officials to consider vaping, snus consuming or other alternatives of harm reduction as a valid option?
You're very right. It's an extremely simple question, but an extremely complex answer, which I won't take on, but I'll invite Jerry maybe to say something on that.
I will. Stand and sit. Maybe I'll stand.
There's a mic runner, Jerry, if you want to use it.
Yeah, okay. I spent much of my life working in evidence-based policy making. And I realised very early on that there's something else which is policy-based evidence making. That the policies are often made and the evidence sort of fits in behind. Evidence is incredibly important, and I really do think that as of now the weight of evidence is pretty convincing about safer nicotine products. We can argue about how much safer, but clearly better than smoking. And if we had a relative who was a smoker, I think we know what our advice to them would be if they say, should I use an e-cigarette or whatever. Unfortunately, it's not just about evidence. You know, I spent my life generating evidence in my research, but it's about hearts and values as well. And that's the sticking block, I think, because when you talk to people who are opposed to harm reduction, they do really feel that this is going to undermine everything that they have fought for over the last 20 years in tobacco control. And there have been big struggles, and there continue to be big struggles in many countries which don't have very good controls over smoking. So they really feel it as a personal threat. And I think it's at that level that we need to begin to engage with people. I don't want to caricature too much, but tobacco control has mainly been presaged more on sticks than on carrots, and making life difficult for smokers and making life difficult for the tobacco industry, with an idea that eventually smoking will disappear and the tobacco industry will disappear. So there's not been enough, from what I see as my the aspects of public health that I like, which has always been about enabling people to do things, not just beating them over the head to do things, but helping them to make the healthy choices. So there are sort of values that permeate harm reduction and values that permeate in tobacco control, which I think we have to deal with as well as the evidence. I think we can always be arguing about the evidence, but it's passionate beliefs we also have to address.
Hi. I think there was a very long connection, and it still exists in a number of countries, that drug harm reduction equals drug legalisation, and that the two have been inextricably linked, and it's taken a very long time to try and disentangle those two concepts. And eventually WHO got it, and do endorse drug harm reduction. Commission on Narcotic Drugs less so, and it's very hard to get the phrase harm reduction into any of their documents even today. It's different with tobacco. I think harm reduction is linked inextricably to tobacco influence. And until we can get to a point, irrespective of what the evidence said, and I agree with Jerry on this, to try and disentangle the idea that anything to do with harm reduction is automatically some kind of plot by big tobacco to re-normalise smoking. I mean, if you look in countries like across Africa and the Middle East, smoking rates are going up. How on earth, safer nicotine products are boosting big tobacco profits, which I've seen a phrase used quite often. Absolutely, I fail to understand this. Some of you may have realised recently that as soon as the FDA announced that they wanted to ban all e-cigarette flavours, the shares of the major tobacco companies in the US just took a hike. And exactly the same thing happened in India. When India government recently said they were thinking of banning e-cigarettes, shares in the India Tobacco Company went up. So, we're back to the evidence really in terms of what tobacco harm reduction is all about. But there's still obviously a long, hard struggle, like there was with tobacco drug harm reduction, to try and disentangle these two concepts.
Gentleman in the front row.
Thank you very much. This is Fred Herder from the Consumer Choice Centre. I think it's very interesting to see the linkage of historic harm reduction, what we've seen with STD harm reduction, drug harm reduction, and we took the WHO to 92 to declassify homosexuality as a mental disease. So I think in the debate of tobacco harm reduction, we should also stress much more how illiberal it is to be against harm reduction, because it's usually like a very illiberal, conservative, autocratic view on actually how to regulate people's lives. If you look actually at the membership structure of the WHO with one country, one vote, you see that most members are actually not liberal democracies, but they're pretty terrible to their people at home as well. So I think just like showing that at least as an argument in liberal democracies, that we are suffering because we're like co-ruled or partially ruled by extremely illiberal countries where not just journalists and gays end up in jail, but also people who try to have tobacco harm reduction or harm reduction in other fields of society.
Anybody wants to respond to that? I think it's a fairly clear point.
I can't really argue with that.
Let me ask another way. Do any of you three disagree with that?
No. No. And interestingly enough, when we're talking about harm reduction here, and there's something I didn't bring up, is when we're talking about tobacco harm reduction within this framework, is it on?
Did I turn it on?
Did you turn it on?
I'm acting.
Just turn it off.
Censorship.
We don't want to hear about you.
We don't want to hear about you. Oh,
You killed it?
did it right? So on. There you go.
When we're talking about tobacco harm reduction, one of the things I didn't bring up, and it's kind of relative here, is the WHO FCTC was talking about increasing taxes on tobacco, and let's raise the excises on tobacco. One of the things that they're doing is they're actually causing harm, because the people who use combustible tobacco, for the most part, okay, they don't care how much it costs to get what they want. All right, and what's happening is you've got people that are giving up eating proper, good food in order to be able to get their tobacco. So now you're putting people into a poverty situation to fulfill their need for combustible tobacco. And yet at the same time, you're not giving them the opportunity for the alternative for something that's safer. So they're causing harm by preventing harm reduction.
Sorry, can I just... No, I just want to pick up on the previous...
I do as well.
Yeah, okay. Just on that previous comment about kind of illiberal regimes, if you then look at a country like Uruguay, which really is not like that at all, to the extent that they've legalised cannabis, but they've banned e-cigarettes. So there's a kind of disconnect across the world here, and it isn't just the most repressive regimes that have taken this view, and some of the policy decisions, if you look across public health, just make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I think I disagree with the illiberal sort of dichotomy, because working in drugs harm reduction, it was surprising how over time we were able to get harm reduction into the most sometimes very difficult countries. I mean, Iran has one of the biggest harm reduction programs of drug users, harm reduction in China, harm reduction in Malaysia, so it's not quite like that. It's often a matter of trying to find the fit between harm reduction, and in Iran and Malaysia it was getting the fit with Islamic law, which was the point, the push point. So, and it's not just the countries. I think the WHO FCT Secretariat have a big role to play here, and others in WHO in not, because secretariats, although they're subject to the parties, but they also help set the agendas with working groups and so on. So in many countries the default position is to look at what the WHO documents say. I mean, WHO FCTC reports say countries should consider, okay, you don't tell countries what to do, consider context e-cigarettes, banning first word or regulating as A, B, C and D. Many countries around the world see the first word banning as the default option as the advice of WHO. They don't even make the separation of WHO FCTC from WHO. WHO says this. So there's a strong responsibility of the UN agencies in this field.
Jeannie.
Yeah, Jeannie Cameron, JCRC. You said that you had been handing out the report this morning to the delegates entering the COP8. I just wondered if you can share with us the reaction that you received by doing that.
I was actually outside the door. Everyone else was down the street. We managed to hand out, I think, about 200 copies to different delegates. We also managed to hand out 1 or 2 copies to people who were actually going into the post office, because we were at the same place where people were. And they did look, there were a couple of very bemused Swiss people looking at us. But anyway, I think it was generally favourably received by people. We didn't get many hostile responses. I had one person hand me back 3 copies. She took one off me, went inside, came out, gave it back to me. She went back in and obviously saw her colleagues and came out with their copies as well. But other than that, most people at least took it. The only thing I think we're asking for is a dialogue with WHO. Let us in the room. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, and let's not just try and ignore it.
What I find extraordinary about the FCTC meeting in comparison with other UN meetings is the major exclusion of NGOs. It's very difficult for NGOs to get access, and it's very hard to make a presence felt. Nearly every UN meeting that I've been to, there's the facilitation of NGO activity. There's an NGO area, there are stalls. You go to a climate change conference, you've got Greenpeace and all the activists there. The Voices there, you go to an AIDS meeting, likewise you go to even the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has an NGO liaison committee to facilitate the engagement and to facilitate the distribution of materials. This is kind of completely closed off, and I think it's probably the first time we've door-stopped delegates with a leaflet, well, a pretty hefty leaflet because it weighs 0.6 of a kilogram, but we were very pleased with the uptake, and some came back for more copies. So yeah, it kind of worked. Now, what the response will be, I don't know. We're also monitoring the web activity, and most of the web activity at the moment is coming from Switzerland.
So in the room.
So in the room, looking at the website for the report.
Anybody else? Oh, Norbert.
Hello, my name is Norbert Schmidt. I'm from the German Consumers Organization, and I want to know how this harm reduction concept can be expanded to people who who simply don't want to quit. I'm an example of people who enjoyed smoking. I really did, and I tried vaping just out of curiosity from all the negative fuss about it. And well, I switched over 6 years ago, and that's my choice. I choose to switch, but I had no intention to quit. And how are these people like me? Okay, we may be a minority, but how does it apply to us. What can we do to get the politics over, to recognize us? And when I was still smoking, and if the taxes had been raised more and more, well, there's always the black market, and it's growing. What about that? They talk about fighting it, but honestly.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because that was one of the arguments that we've had about, the more you tax something, the more you create a black market, and if you don't address the black market, then what have you done? You've just actually created more crime. Now, this also ties in with regulation or legislation of vaping products and those and similar, nicotine products, novel nicotine products in those countries where there are bans, okay? Because if you're saying you can't have it, you're also creating a black market, aren't you? And people will always have what they want. They don't care what cost they'll go to. Now, to answer your question directly, okay, for example, I have no desire to stop using nicotine. You have no desire to stop using nicotine, okay? That should be your choice, okay? You should just continue to do that. But how will they, being regulators or governments, react to that? I'm going to let Harry handle this, because this kind of relates to methadone clinics and such, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think I think our colleague there raises a very important point, and it's the pleasure principle, and that there's a refusal to accept the fact that people enjoy nicotine. And that they're not patients, they're not sick, they don't need medicine. And this is some quotes directly from the report, that these are not in the same category as people who are looking, for example, for methadone or buprenorphine. In that particular sort of drug harm reduction, it's kind of, you can't recover if you're dead. So the principle there is to try and keep people alive for as long as possible in order for them to make the choice about where they want to go. And I suppose Nancy's right, in that sense, it's the same kind of thing. It's not a quit or die, it's a quit or try, and see how you get on with it. But bearing in mind the body of evidence, the balance of evidence in the report about the significantly relative, not just a bit, but the significant relative safety of these products over smoking, and the fact that all the evidence points to the fact that nicotine is a relatively benign substance, and this is another part of the mythology. It's nicotine that causes the cancer, it's nicotine that causes all the respiratory problems and all the rest of it, which and I've spoken to intelligent, well-educated friends of mine, when they find out the work that I'm involved in, they don't believe me, almost, when I try and convince them that it's not the nicotine that's doing the damage. Some of them are smokers, some of them are not. But there's a kernel of morality going on here. I remember reading, not that long ago, a WHO briefing document on what WHO call ENDS, electronic nicotine delivery systems. And there's a specific quote in there that says recreational use of nicotine is not acceptable. It's in the I quote it in the report, and it's in so it seems to me, if you start drilling down through, they're as dangerous as cigarettes, it's all a big conspiracy by big tobacco. All I said, it feels to me, and I might be wrong about this, but if you drill right down into it, what's at stake here? It's a bit like the UN ODC, a drug-free world, we can do it. That was their political aspiration from 2009. And it feels like what we're dealing with here is a nicotine-free world, we can do it. And that seems to be playing out in the FDA and in other legislatures as well. So that's what's at stake here. And that's where you get the consumer choice dimension coming in.
Jerry.
Just a quick one, yeah. What Norbert was talking about is what I call that accidental quitting, and you hear that story again and again. People try e-cigarette and they suddenly realise they've stopped smoking. They didn't intend to. They were trying it as a device and it worked for them. It doesn't work for everybody, and that's some of the issues we need to address about the range of harm reduction products, because in the UK we've got 3.2 million vapers, 6% of the population, but we've got double that who've tried and didn't progress. So I think you need a range of products to attract people. But also, what's been mentioned here is that this is kind of quitting smoking made a bit easier. And you find out about e-cigarettes from the internet or from friends or going onto web chats or forums and so on. And there's an extraordinary amount of information out there from vapers helping smokers, vapers helping vapers. And one of the chat forums in the UK is the e-cigarette forum gets 10,000 hits a day, participants a day, 10,000 a day. If I was trying to set up a public health program and I said, oh well, within a year we'll have 10,000 people a day visiting my website, the Department of Health would say, go away, that's nonsense. So there's something really interesting going on here. And likewise, for the real aficionados, you've got vape fests and meetings where you can try out different goodies. There's no NRT fests. There are no chat forums on NRT saying, have you heard about the new, so there's none of that going on. But here you've got a whole groundswell of cultural change and interest, which isn't being driven by public health experts like me. People are getting on with doing it, and that's what I find so exciting, and that's what you have to kind of help to manage. And the regulatory issue there is how not to have regulations which make it difficult for people to do that, getting the right balance so people are assured of safety. They want to know what they're vaping, that it's going to be safe, and that's the regulatory role. And for the rest of it, let people get on with it. It's rather like if I'm buying a washing machine, I want to know it's going to work and it's not going to blow up. There's the consumer regulation area, I think, which is crucial here. A lot of the add-ons, like the TPD, stupid limits on tank sizes and restrictions on advertising. Why ban advertising of something which is life-saving? Why would you ban advertising of washing machines because you want, I don't know. I'll stop.
Just a small point as an aside on that. Most of you in the audience will know that another project of ours is the Global Forum on Nicotine, and we've held 5 editions of that up to now in Warsaw. And each of those has addressed the issue of tobacco harm reduction in the language, largely, of tobacco control. And the 6th one next June is the strapline for it will be, it's time to talk about nicotine. Because what we want to do is move away from nicotine and tobacco being seen as evil twins. We actually want to look at the whole issue, medically, socially, in every way. So you are being listened to. We are trying our best. And the website will be launched next week. It's very cheap to come as well. But that's it. Judy.
Hi, Judy Gibson, the membership director for INCO, the International Network of Nicotine Consumer Organisations. I only say that in the mornings. Just actually to pick up what Nancy was saying, really, about the fact that if consumers, and we're talking now about safer nicotine consumers, alternative nicotine, it's a worry that if in fact things like flavours, which they're mentioning in America at the moment, the FDA, if they ban them, and a few other countries are doing so, what will actually happen? And I just thought I'd let you know that in Estonia, they've actually already banned flavours, or should we say the ban will come in. They have already put the regulation out, but it will come into force next July. There are now 45% of vapers in Estonia make their own juice. But they've also laid down enough nicotine, probably, to kill all the bees on the planet. Not that, that's a different sort of nicotine, I shouldn't say that, totally different. But it's a real concern, and I think that is going to happen. And in fact, they may think that flavours are a problem, but the idea that people are going to be literally making their own juices, not knowing how to do it. I mean, there's a lot of people that do, and they know exactly what they're doing. But you're getting nicotine in from all over the place. You don't know how much it's got in. Is it 100%? Is it 10%? Flavours, they'll ban flavours, but then they're going to get things like, well, it's the sort of stuff you put in strawberry cakes. They're not made for that. It's a real problem, and I think it's something we really need to look at.
I'll take one more from Henage, and then I'll ask the panel to respond to both, because I'm aware that Jerry needs to leave us shortly.
Hi. Overvanked. Henage Mitchell from Fact Asia. I'm known as H. My question is really, I haven't had a chance to read this voluminous amount of words in front of me, but I did notice that there's a list at the back where it says allowed, 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 not allowed, 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 allowed. And I just wanted to make the point that throughout Asia, specifically Asia, which is where many of us who are attending here live and work, yes, it's allowed, but it's not regulated. I'll give you some specific examples. In Indonesia, it's allowed. They've got it at the highest tax rate possible. It's allowed. That's seen as a victory by the vaporists up to an extent. It's now unaffordable for many people. It's allowed, but no one's regulating the product. Hong Kong recently came up with, interestingly, 2 weeks after we released a survey saying that something like 80% of Hong Kong smokers and 60% of all Hong Kong citizens think the government should allow products to be sold to consumers, smokers, if they're proven to be less harmful. I've come up with some figures saying, no, that's not true. Our figures show that it's like, everybody wants it banned. Plus, there's been a 20% rise in youth uptake. Again, regulations, they're jumping up and down, but the youth is taking up the stuff. We told them, everybody's been telling them for years, you need to ban the sale of these products to underage buyers. That's your job. They haven't done it. So again, I'm looking through the list here. I'm saying it's allowed, it's allowed, it's not allowed, it's allowed, it's allowed. But very few of those countries, in fact almost none of them, actually have regulations on the manufacture of or the sale of the devices and the juices. So I wonder what the panel would like to comment how we can bridge that gap between harm reduction and regulating the products.
On a practical point, before they respond, on the website for the global state, there will be a form on there, because the information that you find in those back pages is going to be updated and expanded on the website. And by the end of this year, there'll be a full website with country profiles for every country in the world. And what we ask people to do is to fill this form in if they know that any of the information is incorrect, or they can point us in a direction where we can update it. So what we want to try and do is, it's very difficult to try and, we were scratching our heads about what tables should go in there, and we ended up with a table that went from there to there across the wall, and we had to cut it down. But the website has got room for infinitely more information, and Harry and his team will be looking at any pieces of information, and we gratefully receive it from any sources, and we'd very happily attribute it to people as well. But it's a user-friendly, and it's something that we want to involve people in. So it's not just our little project and we tell people what's what. But now I'll ask somebody to speak sensibly about it.
Okay. In New Zealand, yes, it shows that it's allowed. Stephen, I noticed this before in the back. It says, oh yeah, yes. But we actually don't have any kind of legislation or regulation. We have what is called self-regulation through the Vendor Association. And the vendors themselves, working with the consumers, have decided that if they're going to be legitimate and part of this association, they're only going to use pharmaceutical-grade diluents, pharmaceutical-grade nicotine. They're going to use food-grade flavorings, and it's a self-regulation regime because the government doesn't have one. We did submit that to the government, and the government is now going to be using that as the basis to actually make it fully legal and a regulated market. I think in a lot of countries, that is how it's going to have to happen. It's going to have to be consumer pressure. We want this. We want to know what we're using is safe. We want to know that our electronic stuff is safe and CE certified, but it's going to have to come from the consumers. You can't expect it to come from industry.
Jerry?
I agree with what Nancy says. You do need regulation, standards. People need to know what's in there. There are 39 countries which have some kind of ban, either a legacy ban or a recent ban. There are 101 countries which don't have any legislative or regulatory framework for e-cigarettes, so that's not good.
I think this is a very important point, because the impression you get is that the whole vaping community is just some sort of wild west of uncontrolled cloud chasing and irresponsibility and all the rest of it. But in fact, they're like Jerry's analogy with the fridge. People actually want regulation and control, but consumer appropriate control, so that they know that what they're using, they know in principle that what they're doing is far safer than smoking. But proper regulation and control goes beyond that. You don't want, heat not burn clone devices floating around all over the place, or e-cigarettes that sort of blow up in your face because they're not properly regulated and controlled. I have to say those events happen fairly rarely, but they do happen. Batteries that are not properly produced and all the rest of it. So the actual regulation and control thing, it's not that people in the vaping community just want some total landscape to do whatever they want and buy whatever they want. They want to be they want those choices, but they want those choices to be safe choices.
We'll take one more question if anyone's got one. Norbert. Getting a lot of exercise today, Jess.
I want to address an elephant in the room. What about the minors? Everybody says, of course, you can't sell this to minors. But what about harm reduction for minors? Many minors are smoking. They shouldn't, they are forbidden to do it, but they do it. And what about harm reduction for them? Are they prohibited from harm reduction? Because these devices, when they are confiscated, that's a lot more harm in their pockets than a cigarette they flinched from their parents or somebody else.
Jerry?
I'll try to answer it diplomatically, but I think the question is, does harm reduction begin at the age of 18 or the age of maturity? And it takes me back to discussions about contraception for younger people. You don't give it to people, but firstly, you couldn't get the contraceptive pill in the UK unless you were married. Then it gradually changed, but you go down and down, because people are at risk from an early age, and we know that most people who smoke start smoking before they're allowed to start smoking before the age of 18. So it's a very key question, I think, how you deal with that quandary. That we all think, keep it out of the hands of kids, and there's all the stuff going on in the US and about Juul and so on. But you really have to consider, if kids are going to be smoking, is it better that they might be doing something other than smoking? So the question for policymakers is to get that sweet spot which protects people.
Interestingly enough, in New Zealand, you can get NRT prescribed to you from the age of 12.
Yeah, UK.
Same in the UK?
Yeah.
I think that kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to say anything, Aaron? Thank you. Okay, I'm going to draw the formal part of the proceedings to a close, but you will notice that there are large numbers of cameras around the room, and Aaron and his team may ask one or two of you if you might like to do an interview. So feel free now to mix and mingle, and obviously the panel is still here if there's any questions, and other members of the team that were responsible for the report. But I'd just like to say a very big thank you to all of you for coming incredible distances in some cases to be here today. It's a landmark day for us, it's a landmark publication, and I hope it's going to be something that's going to have a tremendous impact. I'd like you just to thank in the traditional way the three people who presented it this morning.